My name is Samantha, and at 29 years old, I never imagined that my father's third wedding would become the stage where my life and career would be laid bare for everyone to see. For as long as I can remember, my father, Richard Williams, measured success with dollar signs and polished reputations. He worked as a senior investment banker at one of New York's most prestigious firms, and to him, life was about pristine houses, expensive vacations, and perfectly staged family photos for his office desk. What never fit into that picture was me. When I chose the military instead of law school, he looked at me as if I had announced I was running away with the circus. People from our background don't enlist, Samantha, he had said dismissively. They become officers if they must serve at all. But I enlisted anyway. 4 years in the Army gave me discipline, resilience, and a sharp eye for threats that most people overlooked. When I left the military honorably, I used the GI Bill to study criminal justice, working nights as campus security and days in classrooms. That was when I discovered my passion for private security and protection. Over the next few years, I built a career with Meridian Protection Services, one of the top firms in the country. I specialized in threat assessment and executive protection, leading security operations at high-profile events, including a recent diplomatic conference that earned the firm recognition. My supervisor had even nominated me for a Professional Achievement Award. None of this mattered to my father. In his world, wearing a uniform instead of a tailored suit was synonymous with failure. He never introduced me as a senior security specialist or as someone who had commanded teams under pressure. To his wealthy friends, I was simply his daughter, the security guard. His slight grimace every time he said it made the words sting more sharply than he realized. When his wedding invitation arrived, cream cardstock, embossed gold lettering announcing his union with Eleanor Harrington, a socialite from another banking dynasty, I nearly threw it in the trash. But my best friend Alicia convinced me otherwise. "You should go," she said firmly. "Show him the woman you've become. Show him he was wrong." Against my instincts, I listened. Alicia spent an entire day shopping with me for the right dress. We chose a navy blue gown, elegant but not flashy, paired with silver jewelry that was understated yet strong. Looking at myself in the mirror, I felt like I could walk into that wedding not as the overlooked daughter, but as the professional I had become. Still, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I could already hear his voice introducing me with that same dismissive tone. The night before the wedding, I called my mother, Audrey, who had divorced him when I was 12. She reminded me in her calm teacher voice, "His inability to value your choices is his failure, not yours. You've built a life you're proud of, and that's what matters." I clung to her words as I packed my small overnight bag. When the taxi pulled up to the Rosewood Resort the next afternoon, I was struck by the sheer extravagance of the place. 30 acres of manicured gardens stretched toward the beach where gleaming white tents awaited the ceremony. Crystal decorations sparkled in the sun, and guests in designer clothes glided through the lobby, casually discussing stocks and vacation homes. I smoothed my dress and told myself I belonged there as much as anyone. Then I heard his voice. "Samantha." My father approached with Eleanor on his arm, both looking like they had stepped straight out of a luxury magazine. His greeting was polite but distant, a quick cheek kiss that barely made contact. Eleanor's smile was practiced, her eyes already scanning the lobby for someone more important. "So glad you could join us," she said, her voice warm but empty. "The rehearsal dinner is at 6. Make yourself comfortable until then." They drifted away almost immediately, leaving me standing with my bag in hand and the sinking realization that nothing about this weekend would be easy. A bellhop whisked my luggage to my room, but I couldn't shake the echo of his tone. I had braced myself for disappointment, but it still cut deep. I spent the next few hours walking the beach, letting the salt air calm me.
By the time I returned to dress for the rehearsal dinner, I had made myself a promise. No matter how he introduced me, no matter how small he tried to make me feel, I would not shrink this time. I would sit tall, smile politely, and remember who I really was. Because the truth was, whether my father acknowledged it or not, I was far more than just a security guard. What I didn't know then was how quickly everyone in that resort, including him, was about to find out.
The rehearsal dinner was held in a private dining room that overlooked the ocean, its tall glass windows framing a sunset so vivid it felt almost painted. Round tables dressed in white linen filled the space, each crowned with elaborate centerpieces of orchids and roses. Waiters in crisp uniforms floated silently between guests, refilling glasses of champagne before they were even half empty. Everything about the room screamed elegance and control, except for the way I felt as I walked in. My place card had been set at a table near the edge of the room, far from the head table where my father and Eleanor presided like royalty among their court. I sat down quietly, trying to blend in, but I knew it wouldn't last. The introductions began almost immediately. My father approached with an older couple, his arm firm around Eleanor's waist. "This is my daughter, Samantha," he said. "She's a security guard." Just like that. Not senior specialist, not Army veteran, not threat assessment expert, just a security guard. The woman forced a polite smile, clearly scrambling for something to say. "How interesting." Her husband added quickly, "Richard mentioned you were in the military." "Yes, Army," I confirmed. 4 years, active duty. "Well, thank you for your service," he said, relief flickering across his face at having found a safe response. Within seconds, they were drifting away, and my father was ushering them toward Eleanor's brother, a newly minted partner at Goldman Sachs. I caught their voices as they moved off. "A security guard," the woman whispered. "With Richard's connections, she could have been anything." My cheeks burned, but I swallowed the sting. It was only the beginning. Over the next hour, the scene repeated again and again. 15 different people, 15 different versions of the same introduction. "My daughter, Samantha. She chose a different path. She's a security guard." Each time, the words landed like stones, chipping away at my resolve. By the time dinner was served, I felt reduced to a caricature, the disappointing daughter in uniform. Halfway through the main course, I excused myself and slipped into the restroom. My phone buzzed as I leaned against the sink, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I texted Alicia. "This was a mistake. He's introduced me as just a security guard to everyone." Her reply came fast. "Remember why you're proud of what you do. His opinion doesn't change your value." I breathed deeply, clinging to her words. When I returned to the table, I found myself seated next to the event photographer, a man juggling lenses and plates of food. He gave me a sympathetic smile. "Tough crowd," he murmured. "You have no idea," I said, half laughing. "I overheard one of your introductions." He added, "For what it's worth, security is a hell of a lot more important than what most of these people do. I'd rather have someone keeping me safe than another banker shifting numbers on a screen." His kindness caught me off guard. For the first time that evening, I felt seen. I thanked him quietly and focused on getting through the rest of the night. I drank water instead of wine, wanting to keep my head clear. A dozen times, I considered leaving the resort altogether, catching the first train home in the morning, but stubborn pride rooted me to my chair. Why should I let my father's opinion chase me away? When dessert was served and the speeches began, I clapped politely, smiled when expected, and endured. Inside, though, I promised myself that tomorrow, whatever happened, I would hold my ground. What I didn't realize was that tomorrow would test every skill I had ever learned.
By the time I slipped back into my room, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed on the bed, the humiliation still echoed in my ears. My father's dismissive tone, the guests' awkward smiles, the whispers when they thought I couldn't hear. I stared at the ceiling, replaying each moment, and felt a familiar mix of anger and sorrow rise in my chest. I had wanted so badly for him to acknowledge me just once as something more than a disappointment. Instead, he had paraded me like a cautionary tale. But if the rehearsal dinner was his stage, tomorrow would be mine. I didn't know how or why, but deep in my gut, I sensed that the wedding day would not unfold as perfectly as he had planned. And for the first time all evening, the thought brought a small, steady smile to my lips.
The wedding day dawned bright and impossibly clear, the kind of morning that made the Rosewood Resort sparkle like something out of a travel brochure. Guests wandered the grounds in pastel outfits, photographers tested their lenses in the sharp light, and staff scurried around perfecting the final touches. I tried to keep my distance from it all. After breakfast alone on my balcony, I walked the beach for nearly an hour, letting the rhythm of the waves steady my nerves. By 3 o'clock, it was time to change. I slipped into my dress, pinned back my hair, and gave myself one last look in the mirror. Whatever happened today, I reminded myself, my worth wasn't dependent on how my father introduced me. With that thought clutched tight, I headed downstairs. The ceremony space was set in the garden, white chairs lined up in neat rows beneath an elaborate floral arch. Guests were already filing in, their laughter rising above the soft strains of a string quartet. I slipped into a seat near the back row, happy to be unnoticed. But old habits die hard. Years in the military and security field had trained me to scan every room, every crowd. At first, it was almost automatic, measuring exit routes, noting clusters of guests, mapping potential choke points. Then my eye snagged on something that didn't fit. A catering staff member moved between tables with a tray of glasses, but his uniform sagged oddly on his frame, like it wasn't tailored for him. He carried himself stiffly, his eyes constantly flicking across the crowd, not like someone trying to anticipate drink requests, but like someone calculating, assessing. I felt a prickling at the back of my neck. Maybe I was being paranoid, I told myself. Years of training had wired me to see threats everywhere. But a few minutes later, I noticed him again, murmuring with 2 other staffers near a service entrance. They shared the same restless alertness, the same scanning eyes. My gut clenched. That wasn't standard catering behavior. Moving casually, I left my seat and drifted closer, pretending to admire the floral arrangements. The first man slipped into a side corridor. Against my better judgment, I followed. The hallway smelled of food and cleaning supplies, bustling with actual catering staff carrying trays. I tracked him as he ducked into a storage room at the far end. When the door opened again minutes later, I hid behind a rolling cart stacked with glasses. He emerged with the other 2, their voices low but urgent. I caught fragments. Rich pickings, 2 million in jewelry, after the vows, champagne toast, 4 more coming through the east entrance. My blood turned cold. They weren't catering staff. They were part of a coordinated robbery team, 7 in total from what I gathered, and their plan was precise. They'd strike during the reception when guests would be distracted, jewelry loose and security spread thin. I backed away quietly, heart pounding. My first instinct was to call the police, and I did, ducking into an alcove. I kept my voice low as I identified myself as a security professional and explained what I'd overheard. The dispatcher promised officers were en route, but warned it would take at least 15 minutes. That wasn't soon enough. I needed the resort security team engaged immediately. I hurried to the small office near the lobby, flashing my Meridian Protection Services ID at the guard on duty. "There's a credible threat to the Williams-Harrington wedding," I told him firmly. His skeptical frown melted once he called his supervisor. Within minutes, I was face to face with Michael Jenkins, head of resort security. I laid it out. The mismatched uniforms, the coded conversation, and the plan to infiltrate during the toast. I said, "You need personnel at every exit. They mentioned the east entrance specifically, and they're armed. I'm certain of it." Jenkins hesitated, weighing my words, then nodded.
He grabbed his radio and began issuing orders. "Are you carrying?" he asked quietly. "No, I'm a guest." "Understood. We'll position extra guards near the jewelry and gifts." "It won't be enough," I warned. "They're organized and dangerous. Just hold the perimeter until the police arrive." By the time I slipped back into the ceremony space, the string quartet was still playing and guests were settling in. Nobody had any idea. At the front, my father stood proudly at the altar, his face lit with genuine joy as Eleanor began her walk down the aisle. For a moment, I almost let myself get lost in the beauty of it. But then I saw them, two more caterers hovering near the gift table. Their movements were too controlled, their eyes too sharp. I texted Jenkins descriptions and their location, then shifted to the back of the garden for a clearer view. The officiant's voice rose over the music asking for vows, but I barely heard it. My attention was split, adrenaline sharpening my senses. When I spotted yet another suspicious figure near the bar setup, his jacket bulging in a way that screamed concealed weapon, my pulse spiked. I typed another urgent text to Jenkins. As the couple exchanged rings and guests burst into applause, I knew with sick certainty that the robbery wouldn't wait for the champagne toast. They were already in place, and the clock was running out.
The moment the officiant declared my father and Eleanor husband and wife, the garden filled with applause and the clinking of champagne flutes. Servers emerged with trays, smiling broadly as they passed glasses to the guests. But my eyes weren't on the happy couple or the sparkling drinks. They were locked on the three men I had identified earlier, who were now communicating with almost imperceptible nods and gestures. Something in the air shifted, a tension only someone trained would notice. Then it happened. The lights strung across the tent flickered briefly, a calculated disruption. At the same instant, the man near the bar reached into his jacket. My instinct screamed, "Gun!" I shouted, diving toward the nearest cluster of guests just as the first shot cracked into the air. Screams erupted, guests dropping behind chairs and tables in a wave of chaos. The gunman's voice thundered above the panic. "Nobody move, this is a robbery. Stay calm and you won't get hurt." Two more men pulled weapons, fanning out across the garden. Others began demanding jewelry, yanking watches and purses from terrified guests. In seconds, the elegant wedding had dissolved into a scene of terror. My eyes swept the chaos. My father and Eleanor were crouched by the altar, his arm wrapped around his shoulders as a gunman advanced on them. Across the aisle, an elderly woman clutched her chest, her face pale, gasping as though the shock was triggering something worse. One of the robbers barked, "Shut her up," raising his gun toward her companion. My body moved before my mind caught up. I rose, keeping my hands visible, and stepped into the gunman's line of sight. "I'm a medic," I lied smoothly. "She's having a cardiac episode. Let me help her before she dies. A corpse turns this into murder, not robbery." He hesitated, gun wavering, then jerked his head. "Do it, fast." Kneeling beside the woman, I placed myself between her and the weapon. "Breathe with me," I whispered, demonstrating slow inhales and exhales while scanning the room. The suspects were positioned like a trained team, two covering the exits, one managing the guests, another rifling through valuables. I couldn't wait for the police to arrive. It would be too late. Just then, my gaze locked on the leader. He was looming over my father, demanding his Patek Philippe watch and Eleanor's diamond necklace. My father's hands shook as he surrendered the watch. Eleanor fumbled with the clasp, tears streaking her mascara. The leader snatched both items, then shoved his gun against my father's temple. "The code to the bridal suite safe," he snapped. My father stammered, I don't know it by heart. It's on my phone." "No phones." The leader pressed the barrel harder against his head. Rage surged through me, white hot and absolute. For years, I had endured his dismissal, his contempt for my career. But in that moment, he was not the cold investment banker who had belittled me. He was my father, trembling beneath the muzzle of a gun. I couldn't let him die.
"There's a master list of codes at the front desk. I can get it for you. I work here. Security." The leader snapped his head toward me, suspicious. "You? Security?" "Yes," I said evenly. "I know the protocols. You want the codes. I can get them." He stepped closer, lowering his gun from my father and advancing toward me. It was the opening I needed. Years of combat training roared back into my muscles. As he closed the distance, I shifted my weight, waited for the precise moment, then moved. In one fluid motion, I seized his wrist, twisting it just as my other hand struck his solar plexus. His gun clattered to the ground as he crumpled, wheezing. I scooped up the weapon, adrenaline flooding my veins. The room erupted. One of his men fired wildly in my direction, the bullet grazing my arm with a hot, searing pain. I dropped behind an overturned table, dragging the leader with me as a human shield. Blood soaked my sleeve, but I held tight to the gun, shouting to the stunned security staff frozen near the perimeter. "Now!" That single word broke their paralysis. Resort security surged forward, joined by two undercover officers who had slipped in as guests. Gunfire rattled briefly, sharp cracks echoing through the garden, then a chorus of commands. "Drop your weapon, hands where we can see them." 3 suspects surrendered immediately, dropping their guns to the grass. One bolted toward the kitchen, dragging a server as a hostage. My arm throbbed, but I couldn't stop. I shoved the subdued leader toward an officer and sprinted after the fleeing man, ducking through the kitchen doors into the chaos of clattering pans and screaming staff. He had the server pinned near the loading dock, his gun pressed against her temple. "Back off or she dies," he roared. I slowed, hands spread, my voice steady. "Listen to me. Armed robbery is one thing. Murder, make sure you never see daylight again. You have one chance to walk out alive. Let her go." His grip faltered, just for a second. It was enough. I lunged, striking his wrist with surgical precision. The gun spun away. I locked him in a restraint hold, dragging him to the ground as the hostage scrambled free. Seconds later, officers swarmed in, securing him. The fight was over. My knees felt weak as the adrenaline ebbed, but I forced myself upright, pressing a towel against the wound on my arm. "Check the elderly woman in the reception hall," I ordered the nearest paramedic. "She needs help now." As I walked back toward the ceremony space, the surreal reality began to sink in. Tables overturned, guests trembling, police taking statements. It looked like a war zone in the middle of a wedding. My father stood near the altar, Eleanor clinging to his side, both pale and shaken. When he saw me, his face crumpled. "Samantha, you're hurt." I looked down at my bloodied sleeve. "It's just a graze," I said, though my arm throbbed with every heartbeat. "Are you both okay?" He nodded stiffly, his eyes still wide with disbelief. Around us, voices rose, guests whispering, astonished that, "That's Richard's daughter. Did you see what she did?" My father flinched as the words reached him, the weight of them pressing against the fragile facade he built for years. For the first time, he had no introduction ready, no dismissive title on his tongue. The only thing left for him to do was face the truth of who I really was. The next hour passed in a blur of flashing lights, shouted commands, and the metallic smell of blood. Mine and thankfully no one else's. Police swarmed the grounds, cuffing suspects and collecting evidence. Paramedics moved between guests, treating panic attacks, fainting spells, and my still bleeding arm. I sat on a folding chair near the edge of the lawn, a paramedic stitching me up while detectives asked rapid-fire questions. "How did you know?" one pressed. "What tipped you off before anyone else noticed?" I explained about the uniforms, the body language, the coded conversation I had overheard. The detective scribbled notes, his brow furrowing in admiration. "If you hadn't acted when you did, this could have been a massacre," he said. "They're linked to 3 other robberies. At those, people got hurt. You stopped that pattern tonight." I swallowed hard. I had just done my job, the job I had been belittled for years. But hearing him say it, framed so starkly, brought a quiet swell of pride.
Nearby, my father stood with Eleanor, both of them giving statements to a detective. I could see the tremor in his hands as he gestured, the disbelief etched into his features. For once, he wasn't in control of the narrative. The story belonged to me. When the stitches were finished, I was cleared to walk. I found myself drawn back into the hall, where overturned chairs and shattered glasses littered the floor. Guests whispered in clusters, pointing subtly toward me. A few stepped forward with gratitude. "You saved us. You were incredible. Thank you." Their praise felt strange, like wearing someone else's shoes. I nodded politely but kept moving. At the far side of the room, my father broke away from Eleanor and approached me. His eyes dropped immediately to my bandaged arm. "Samantha, are you sure you're all right?" "I've had worse," I said evenly. "Are you and Eleanor okay?" He nodded but didn't meet my gaze. "They said you—" He stopped, searching for words. "The police said you saved lives. Mine. Eleanor's." He looked smaller somehow, stripped of his practiced arrogance. "I was just doing what I'm trained to do, even if it is just being a security guard." His face flushed at my deliberate echo of his words from the night before. Before the moment could stretch, a detective approached to take me aside for a formal statement. I followed gratefully, not ready to process my father's expression. By the time I returned, the reception had been called off, the area cordoned as a crime scene. Guests were leaving in waves, escorted by officers. Outside, I caught sight of a local news crew setting up. Cameras, lights, microphones. My stomach sank. I wasn't interested in fame, but I knew the story was out of my hands now. I slipped past them quietly and made my way back to my room, exhausted, still in my blood-stained dress. The shower was agony, keeping my bandage dry while scrubbing off the sweat and fear of the evening. I collapsed into bed with my phone buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand. Dozens of missed calls and texts. Alicia, frantic, my boss at Meridian, twice, even a couple of old Army friends who must have seen something online. I silenced it and let sleep swallow me. Morning brought no reprieve. I woke to a phone vibrating across the table, my arm throbbing, and sunlight spilling through the curtains. The first notification was from Alicia. "You're on the news. Call me." My chest tightened. I turned on the TV and there it was. Shaky cell phone footage from last night, paired with commentary. Breaking news. Attempted armed robbery foiled at luxury resort wedding. The dramatic intervention of Samantha Williams, a decorated Army veteran and current security professional, saved dozens of lives. The screen flashed my headshot from Meridian's website, followed by security camera footage of me disarming the leader. I watched myself move with precision, decisive and calm, while guests scrambled in panic. It was surreal, like seeing a version of myself I barely recognized. The coverage cut to a press briefing. The captain stood on a podium praising my actions. Her quick thinking and training prevented what could have been catastrophic. These suspects are part of a crew responsible for multiple high-profile robberies. Thanks to Miss Williams, they're in custody. Then came interviews with guests, voices choked with awe. "She saved us," like an action movie. "That young woman is a hero." I switched the TV off, heart racing. I wasn't used to being center stage. My job had always been to blend in, to see without being seen. Now my entire life was on display. My phone buzzed again. This time a voicemail from my mother. "Honey, I saw the news. I'm so proud of you, but please call me. I need to hear your voice." Pride swelled in my chest, softer than the adrenaline-fueled rush of last night. She had always seen me. Always. Now the world was catching up. Still bandaged, still tired, I pulled on the only other outfit I'd packed. A black pantsuit. It hung awkwardly on my injured arm, but it would do. Today there was a brunch and the detectives wanted a follow-up. I considered skipping it altogether, slipping out unnoticed, but a voice inside me said, "No, don't run this time." So I squared my shoulders, left my room, and walked toward the dining hall, unaware that the next revelation was waiting on a television screen in front of a room of people who had written me off.
The brunch was set in a smaller ballroom than the night before, but it still carried that air of polished elegance my father loved. Buffet tables groaning with pastries and smoked salmon, guests in muted pastels murmuring about the previous day's chaos. The difference now was the way their eyes tracked me when I entered. Yesterday, I had been invisible, seated at the margins. Today, whispers followed me like shadows. Eleanor spotted me first and hurried over, her usual composure shaken. "Samantha, thank you for coming," she said, her voice soft. "How was your arm?" "It'll heal," I replied simply. "I understand the detectives wanted to speak with me again." "Yes," she nodded quickly. "But Richard, he's been telling everyone how proud he is of you. It's been a shock, of course, but he's trying." I couldn't trust myself to respond without bitterness, so I gave her a polite nod and moved toward the coffee station. The shift was palpable. Guests who had ignored me the night before now angled for proximity. Some asked questions about my career, others offered effusive gratitude. It was overwhelming, disorienting, like the spotlight was turned on me against my will. I sipped coffee, trying to appear calm, though inside I wanted to vanish. Then I saw him. My father sat near the window, surrounded by his closest friends, gesturing animatedly as he spoke. His words carried farther than he realized. "Always knew she had potential," he said loudly. "That military training paid off, didn't it?" My chest tightened. Revisionist history, his attempt to rewrite years of dismissal into paternal foresight. Before I could decide whether to confront him, a staff member touched my arm. "Miss Williams, the detectives are ready for you." I followed her gratefully to a private room. The interview was straightforward, confirming details of the robbery, clarifying timelines. One detective told me, "All 7 suspects are in custody, and the evidence links them to multiple robberies. You'll likely be called to testify. And, Miss Williams, there's already talk of a commendation. What you did was extraordinary." I downplayed it, but their words left me shaken. Extraordinary. Hero. Those words had never been used for me in my father's world. When I returned to the brunch, I intended to slip out. I had done my duty. But as I crossed the room, my father's voice rang out. "There she is, the hero of the hour." He stood, drawing every gaze toward me. His arm came around my shoulders in a show of affection that felt alien. "I was just telling everyone how she's always been protective. Remember when she stood up to that bully at 10 years old?" Laughter rippled. I forced a tight smile, but inside I burned. Now I was convenient for him to parade now that the world had labeled me heroic. I started to pull away, but then the room shifted. A murmur rose from the bar area where a television hung on the wall. Someone had turned up the volume. "Breaking news, we now have more footage of the attempted armed robbery foiled yesterday at the Rosewood Resort wedding." Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned toward the screen. My professional headshot appeared, then grainy cell phone clips of me tackling the leader, moving with calm precision under fire. The anchor's voice narrated. "Samantha Williams, a decorated Army veteran and senior operative with Meridian Protection Services, is being credited with saving dozens of lives." The footage cut to the security cameras, the kitchen chase, the hostage rescue, my restraint hold executed flawlessly. Guests gasped aloud. Then came the soundbite. "Without her intervention, this could have been a mass casualty event." Someone whispered loudly, "That's Richard's daughter." I watched my father as he watched me on the screen. His champagne flute slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor, golden liquid pooling around his shoes. He didn't bend to pick it up. He just stared, his face drained of color, eyes locked on the television as though seeing me for the first time. When the segment ended, the silence broke into scattered applause that grew until the entire room was clapping. I stood frozen, heat rising in my cheeks. Guests who had ignored me the night before now surged forward with praise, questions, admiration. But my focus stayed on my father, still rooted to his spot.
champagne dripping from his cuff, his expression a tangle of shock, embarrassment, and something else, something raw, almost like pride. For years, I had carried the weight of his disappointment, of introductions that shrank me into nothing. Now the truth blared from the television for all to see, and in that moment, standing in the echo of applause, I realized the balance of power between us had shifted forever.
The applause eventually tapered off into scattered conversation, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted completely. Yesterday, I was a footnote at the edge of the party. Now I was the headline everyone wanted to discuss. Guests clustered around me with questions about my military service, about meridian protection, about how I had recognized the threat. Their curiosity felt invasive, and though I answered politely, I longed to escape. My father hadn't moved. He stood near the shattered remnants of his champagne glass, shoulders tight, his expression unreadable. Eleanor leaned close, whispering something I couldn't hear, but he didn't respond. Finally, he turned, his eyes finding mine across the room. For once, there was no smugness, no dismissal, just a raw, searching gaze. He crossed the floor slowly, as though uncertain whether I'd allow him near. "Samantha," he said quietly when he reached me, his voice stripped of its usual authority. "We need to talk." I wanted to say no, to brush past him as he had brushed me aside so many times before, but the weight in his voice stopped me. "Not here," I replied. He nodded quickly, almost gratefully. "This afternoon, private." "Text me the time and place," I said, then slipped out before anyone else could stop me. The air outside was cool, salt-tinged from the ocean. I inhaled deeply, trying to steady myself. My phone buzzed minutes later. Top floor lounge, 3 o'clock. I almost didn't go. Part of me felt he didn't deserve the chance, but another part, the part that still longed for acknowledgement, pushed me toward that meeting. At 3 sharp, I entered the lounge. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the endless ocean. My father sat in a corner booth, 2 glasses on the table. One was club soda with lime. "I remember you don't drink on duty," he said, gesturing to it. The small gesture startles me. He had noticed. I sat, careful to keep my injured arm comfortable. For a moment, silence stretched between us. Finally, he spoke. "I watched the coverage again this morning. They broke down everything you did. The threat assessment, the positioning, the precision when you disarmed the leader. It was like hearing about a stranger, except it was my daughter." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. I clenched my hands around the glass. "That's the problem. I've never been a stranger. I've been right here, but you never looked." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "I deserved that," he admitted. "I thought I knew what was best for you, the path that guaranteed success, stability. I measured you against that, and when you didn't fit, I dismissed what you had chosen. I thought you were wasting your life. And when you believed that, you introduced me to everyone as just a security guard. Do you have any idea what that felt like?" His eyes lowered. Humiliating, belittling. And now I see it wasn't just cruel. It was blind. He took a shaky breath. "Yesterday, when that gun was at my head, I didn't think about my career or Eleanor or the house in the Hamptons. I thought about you, about how much time I wasted not seeing who you really are. And then you stepped forward, calm, certain. You saved me, Samantha. You saved all of us." The sincerity in his voice tugged at something deep, but I wasn't ready to let him off easily. "I didn't suddenly become worthy because of yesterday. I've been this person all along. The only thing that changed was your perception." He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. "You're right. I can't erase years of dismissal.
I can only tell you I'm ashamed of how little I valued you, and I want the chance to change that." For a long moment, I studied him. This man who had spent his life chasing status now sat humbled before me, asking for forgiveness. "That would be a start," I said finally. His shoulders sagged in relief. He attempted a smile. "Your mother always said you knew your own mind better than anyone. She told me trying to steer you differently would only drive you away. She was right, as usual." The mention of Mom made me smile despite myself. "She's been at my award ceremonies, you know, the ones you never came to." His face tightened with regret. "She reminded me of that when she called yesterday. I've been a fool, Samantha." For the first time, I believed he knew it. Silence stretched again, but it was different now. Less hostile, more tentative, as if we were learning how to speak as father and daughter for the first time. He lifted his glass of soda. "To second chances." Slowly, I raised mine. "We'll see." Our glasses clinked softly, a fragile sound, but in it I heard the possibility of something new.
In the weeks that followed, my life shifted in ways I hadn't anticipated. The footage of the robbery went viral, carried by national networks and replayed with breathless commentary. My phone lit up daily with interview requests, speaking invitations, and messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. I declined most of them, choosing to keep my focus on the work itself rather than on the spectacle. Still, the exposure had consequences. Meridian promoted me, putting me in charge of a new division focused on event threat assessment and rapid response training. For the first time, I was not only protecting people myself, but also shaping the next generation of professionals who would stand between chaos and safety. The scar on my arm was a constant reminder of that day, not of pain, but of purpose. My father surprised me by attending the ceremony where I received the Civilian Bravery Award. He sat between my mother and Eleanor, a strange but peaceful alignment of past and present. When my name was called and the applause rose, I caught him clapping. Not that perfunctory applause I had seen at countless business dinners, but something genuine. Afterward, he approached me privately. "You were magnificent," he said simply. No caveats, no comparisons, just those 3 words. That moment mattered more to me than the medal pinned to my chest. Our relationship didn't transform overnight. Decades of distance don't dissolve in a single apology or even a single heroic act. But there was effort now. Calls where he asked about my work and actually listened. Dinners where he didn't steer the conversation towards stock indexes. Moments where he admitted when he was wrong. For a man like my father, those small steps were monumental. He even attended one of my team's tactical demonstrations, watching as I led drills on disarming and evacuation training. I saw pride in his eyes, quiet and tentative, but real. Over time, I realized something essential. His recognition was welcome, but it wasn't what defined me. I had already proven my value long before he saw it. The real transformation wasn't in him finally applauding me. It was in me finally understanding that I didn't need his applause to be complete. Therapy helped me process that truth. I worked through years of internalized dismissal, the times I had doubted my path because of his voice echoing in my head. Gradually, I replaced that voice with my own, firm, grounded, certain of my choices. Security work was not glamorous by his standards, but it was meaningful by mine. And meaning, I discovered, is the deepest form of success. Nearly a year after the wedding, I stood on a stage at a charity gala my father and Eleanor had organized. The cause was first responders, and they had asked me to speak. Looking out at the polished crowd, I felt none of the shame that used to cling to me in such rooms. Security isn't only about protection. It's about creating spaces where people can live, love, and celebrate without fear. Sometimes that means physical safety, but often it's something deeper.
a sense of being valued for who you truly are. My gaze found my father in the audience. This time, when our eyes met, there was no grimace, no dismissal, just recognition. True and unflinching. After the gala, he pulled me aside. "You've taught me more in this past year than I learned in 30 years of finance," he admitted. "I spent my life chasing status. You've shown me that integrity is the real currency." For once, I had no rebuttal, no sharp retort. I simply accepted his words and let them settle where years of silence used to be. Today, I still wear the Meridian badge, still put myself in harm's way when needed, but I carry myself differently now, lighter, steadier, because I know my path is valid, not because others finally acknowledged it, but because I have. My father and I will never rewrite the past, but we are building a future where respect runs both ways. And that is enough. So if you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or introduced as just something, remember this: your worth doesn't hinge on someone else's recognition. It's built in, waiting for you to claim it. I wonder, have you ever had a moment where someone finally saw your true value after years of overlooking it? Or perhaps a dramatic event that shifted a difficult relationship in your life? Share your story in the comments below. If my journey resonates with you, hit like, subscribe for more, and pass this along to someone who might need to hear that their path matters, even when others can't see it yet. Thank you for listening. And remember, true security, the kind that lasts, comes from knowing without doubt that you are exactly where you are meant to be.